This is part two of the Disaster Emergency Response and Recovery podcast. We will now pick up where we left off in part one with Dr. Tanya Thornton.
Which disasters statistically have the most impact or the highest levels of risk?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, obviously it's place dependent. Right now, everyone's attention is on the pandemic because this is the first time in our nation's and our international community's history is that every country, every state, every person is being impacted by COVID-19. Maybe not directly by the virus, but economically, socially, psychologically, otherwise. And so in the United States, we've never had all 50 states declare a state of an emergency. And here we are, living in a very different world than we were just a few months ago. Now we've entered into hurricane season as of June 1, in which scientists and forecasters have predicted that this is going to be 60% higher than average hurricane season. So we had a couple of named storms right at the beginning. Right now it seems to be kind of quiet, but we also are now dealing with the Saharan desert winds that are taking over the Caribbean and the southern and mid-Atlantic states, which is why if you go outside today or in the next few days, depending on when this airs, you're going to see probably it looks kind of hazy or sandy or foggy, and each area will look very differently. But, hurricanes obviously get a lot of notoriety. Earthquakes don't happen as often in the United States, but that could change as plate tectonics shift. Tornadoes typically are more associated when we have a very mild winter. So all of those are at play right now in the natural world. Drought, water wars, and other hazards that the international community are facing. It's not easy just to place your finger on one that's the most statistically significant or the one that occurs the most. It's just really being in tune with where you're at and at what time of the year it is, and understand that as these geophysical forces change over millennia, and we don't really know where we're at in the millennia, we do, geoscientists do, but it will start shifting where these things occur, right? Yeah.
That's very interesting. So when you say social construction, what do you mean by that, and how does it apply to disasters?
Okay. You have to have human vulnerability interact with a hazard in order to have a disaster. Otherwise, it's just a natural event. You can't say the same for man-made because we're the ones who are creating it, so it's likely going to result in disaster anyways. So when we talk about human vulnerability, we mean a number of things. We're talking about geographic location. Remember the question you asked earlier, where are the most places prone to disasters? The water. We have to think about gender, age, race, education, income levels. All of these impact your ability to evacuate or be knowledgeable about what can occur. We have to pay attention to improper land use, to inadequate construction, zoning, and comprehensive planning, particularly at the local level. We have to look at the fact that the field of emergency management is still relatively young, and most of our time in the United States has been rooted in civil defense, which is military paramilitary mentality. When you think of it from the community side, at the local level in our country, they don't respond that way. They need the community activist, the stakeholder, the person that they trust, because trust and capital go very far when it comes to local response. And so if you always have just the military, paramilitary, and even to a degree first response perspective, you're missing out on that psychological piece that most of the rest of us are looking for, right? We want to know it's going to be okay, and that, let's all get together and have a cookout after it's over, because that's a sign of resiliency, right? Is that community, that communal identity, again, because place matters. Knowing that emergency management can, as trained in the academy, with a foot connected or a foot grounded in the community of practice, right? Because I'm not just a traditional academic. I did R&D. So I'm not one that went straight from undergrad to master's to PhD. Now I did, but I worked full time doing R&D around some of these issues with communities because they didn't have the money to do them. And so I like to say I'm a pracademic. So I am an academic, but I have a practitioner understanding, and I can communicate with those localities. So that language is very important. When we talk about defense, civil defense, national security, and other things, that's also critical because I don't speak that language as well. I speak enough of it that I can connect it back to the community, right? So you have to find these people who are the go-betweens that have a little bit of, a knowledge in all these spaces and then just know one policy or one subject matter area very well. So emergency management, community resiliency for me, because otherwise you could do more damage if not.
And that kind of leads into my next question. What is the difference between social production of disasters and disaster social constructs?
Okay. So the social construction of disasters is, when we think about disasters, they can be long-term in terms of their consequences, unintended and unanticipated. And when we think of the human condition and all our vulnerabilities, we construct it in a different way, right? The social production of disasters, rather, is the fact that we have this disaster mindset, this mentality that perpetuates it. And that perpetuation also leads into one of our vulnerabilities, because then we become fascinated with the unique, the ununderstandable, we want that angle on how to explain things, but at the same time we don't want to invest in it. We expect the government to take care of victims and families following these types of punctuated or focusing events, and we don't want to take the personal responsibility. So there's this expanding sense of entitlement. So that's kind of on the social production side versus the social construction that social capital, political trust really either will help you or harm you in planning for and responding to disasters.
So how does that social construction of disasters perpetuate disaster myths?
Well, there's always the media. Thank you, media. And I'm not knocking the media, but they always want that unique angle. I'm sure many of you have seen the Weather Channel's video from a storm a year or so ago of a gentleman pretending that there was a lot of wind beating him around, and then in the background there were just some people walking. So, it's trying to capture the audience, get a higher percentage of people watching to move on to the next level and broadcasting, I'm sure. But it's not just that. It's also our Hollywood syndrome, too. We've got movies like Twister that want to fantasize and sensationalize the unimaginable. We've got, oh goodness, I don't want to say Outbreak, but we should have been watching that one a little more closely back in the day. We've got San Andreas Fault. These larger than life films that do have some reality to them and some lessons that we can draw from them, but they completely blow it out of proportion as to what the reality is and in terms of response, because it's very bureaucratic. Yes, it is. You have to have a lot of these things in place ahead of time. Some places are better at it than others. And so we just become hypnotized, almost captivated by what we don't understand, what we want the government to take care of, but that we do not want to pay for.
So what is the ecological difference of disasters, like the distinction between natural, man-made, and high threat? And how has this classification evolved over time? Like, is there a difference in approach to natural disasters versus man-made?
Yeah, okay, so going back to the earlier comment, we talk about obviously natural environment. So everything from atmospheric to hydrological to seismic, anything that the Earth is producing on its own without our involvement. Now, again, we can exacerbate those things, which we are doing, but it's not anything that we can manifest ourselves. Obviously, man-made, anything from dam failures to bridge collapses to oil spills to environmental situations, and then when we used to consider civil discourse and civil defense issues domestically as part of that man-made side, but now there's this new branch that we're calling high threat paradigm. And what we mean by the high threat paradigm, and this is just a few years old and it's not widespread yet, but it is your active shooter situations, fire as a weapon, marauding, riot violence, which we are now seeing very active in front of us with what's going on currently in the national political stage. And so these things evolve over time, just as our terminology of how we classify or how we understand hazards and disasters has evolved over time. And I suspect that will continue to do so. We didn't always, we used to be very civil defense, and now we're homeland security. So it's just a play on words. We used to be very big data, and now we are, looking in innovative data or data sciences or computational data. So we used to say policy analysis and program evaluation. Now we say evidence-based decision-making. So this will continue to change as our lexicon continues to grow, right? I mean, right now the catchphrases are resiliency and sustainability, and everyone wants to define resiliency for what thematic area or subject matter area that they know very well. Well, why do we have to define it? Why can't it just not be a methodological approach, a scientific approach, or understanding to get from A to B? And then sustainability, I would hope, is our outcome based on what we're trying to do with that approach for that time and that place and that subject. So it gets really frustrating sometimes because, a lot of my colleagues are grounded in the social sciences. A lot of my colleagues are grounded in the hard sciences. And you either have to go one camp or the other. Well, we need, as I would say, the flower to the stem. So we need the STEM sciences, but we need the social policy and administrative sciences to help translate that to reality. And so that's why my background has a little bit of geosciences, because I wanted to be able to understand what my scientists and the hard sciences, physical sciences, were trying to accomplish. And so it provided me a different perspective in moving forward.
So what changes would you recommend today to ensure the optimal emergency response and recovery to a disaster?
Local authorities are becoming our force multipliers. We are seeing that right now with COVID-19, where we have, differences in opinion and leadership at the federal level to state level to local level. But now you're seeing these regional compacts, as I mentioned earlier, between the DMV around COVID response and trying to sync up their plans for reopening the economy or the phased reopening of the economy. And not just the economy, but all the different sectors within the society, education, business, more cultural and social activities. And so I think that this is also the truth can be said the same for localities when we respond to hurricanes. I believe we saw it also with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We are seeing it when, Superstorm Sandy, trying to coordinate efforts as much as possible, because people trust their own members, community members. They don't want someone from the federal government or the state government that probably can't even pronounce the towns correctly, and phonetically maybe as you read it, but not the way in which they pronounce it. So having that connection to place, or even knowing someone in that place on a more meaningful and deeper level, will help us with our resiliency, and we'll be able to plan and respond and recover much quicker.
Okay, and I just have one more question for you. So what are some examples of emerging technologies that relate to building and sustaining and improving capabilities to prepare for and protect and respond against these mitigated disasters?
So there's a few different things. I'm going to mention one technology and then one model. So I've been working on this model that has been rooted both in sociology, public administration, and emergency management, related more on the geosciences side. FEMA always talks about communication and coordination, communication and cooperation. And these are the C's that they really live within. And that's wonderful, but when we're talking about disasters and that connection to place, there are so many issues around social capital and political trust that if you do not have what I call this third C, meaningful collaboration, you're not going to get very far. So we've got to make more effort on increasing our communication with stakeholders, whether that be a governing body, whether that be the bureaucratic entities at the local, state, or federal level, the people who are doing the job. Increase our communication with people that dissent against us or dissent against your idea. A way to communicate on all fronts, right? We've got to increase our efforts around communication. Only then can we really see any type of true cooperation. And by cooperation, I mean just starting to coordinate things, coming together, really having a sense of stakeholdership. But we can't stop there. You've got to think about the place and the context of what the history is, the culture is, and the knowledge base is there, right? And then only then can you start moving into this world of meaningful collaboration. So the 3 C's: communication, enhance your coordination, cooperation, so that way you can have meaningful collaboration. And so I've been working with a couple different entities around this. One is this platform called MeetingSphere. Now, MeetingSphere, from what I was told, was created for the military so that way captains could tell generals what they were doing wrong. So in good fashion, like an academic does and ponders about world issues, and given the racial dialogues that are underway right now in this country, I was just talking to a colleague that's former DOD, in fact, about, what can we do to kind of facilitate a meaningful conversation that could lead to some real change at the local level with respect to policies and law enforcement agencies right now. He's like, well, I know this platform called MeetingSphere. I can get you a tutorial. We can set up a survey, and then we can start working with local law enforcement agencies where we already have established relationships, but we can't just work with those. We have to have partners in the community that can bring everyone together. So what's really cool about this platform or this technology is that it is a facilitated, a guided survey, open-ended, closed-ended question where you don't know who's participating. They're answering the questions live. There's no audio or video, so it's completely anonymous other than the person who's facilitating or driving the survey screen. You can do it from the comfort of your home around the world while you're traveling, but it brings community members from all walks of life and all areas of expertise or background together to truly and quickly inform policymakers on critical issues. So that project just popped up from me running my mouth 2 weeks ago. And it is moving fast. The team has grown to about 15, 20 people, and it's just as diverse as what we're trying to accomplish. You can look at it. You can utilize this platform for, issues around active shooters or riot violence and other ways, because we've seen that with Charlottesville. So it's not just what's happening now. We can look at it around disaster planning at the community level, right? So you actually have the people in which you're going to be, if you want to change their behavior, you have to have them have a sense of ownership. And if they can be part of that planning process, what better way than to get them on board ahead of time? Even though their name may not be listed, it was a community platform for everyone to come together real time. The other great feature about this technology is that it's already got the statistics built into it. So as they're answering, it's already giving you the percentage breakdown and the standard deviation. So they've built the functionality of all these other tools within this one platform. So yeah, very excited. More to come on that, obviously, and it could have applications for defense as well and Homeland Security, because people, COVID-19, we could have a real conversation about what people are thinking in terms of, is this a hoax? Is this not a hoax? It could be used for climate change. So yeah, endless application.
That's awesome. Well, I just want to thank you for, enlightening us on, your work. I mean, it's so pertinent to what is going on in our world today, the state that everything is in. And, I just wish you luck on all your future endeavors with working with this as well.
Thank you so much, Amber. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk a little bit about the, disasters and emergency management in the U.S., and then also a little bit about why they are so fascinating, because they are socially constructed. And so, they touch everyone at one point or another in every field. Doesn't matter if it's sociology, it doesn't matter if it's defense, it doesn't matter if it's policy or public health. Everyone's going to have to deal with this. And it's just a great skill set to have a better understanding. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you for joining the HDIAC podcast. To learn more about our other services, please reach out directly or visit us online at www.hdIAC.org.